So welcome everybody, and I hope that we can actually have some fun here. I will be talking most of the time. Unfortunately, there aren't that many exercises for you in this talk, but I will ask you to raise your hands a few times during the talk. So I want to talk to you about Agile from the future, because I think the future of Agile is, well, you might have some ideas. Some people think Scrum is dead. Even one of the manifesto co-authors wrote an extensive article about how Agile itself is dead because of how people are using it. Some people say we're back to lean. Let's use the benefits of the lean manufacturing in software because this Agile thing is not really for everybody. Some people are arguing that DevOps is so much better than Agile. Let's all be DevOps. But whatever that is, I'm pretty sure that the future of Agile is distributed. And here's why. A lot of companies are using Agile practices and mindset to develop their software and products. And small companies that are usually Agile from the get-go, they are starting to actually go distributed as they're growing. So these two worlds are coming together and they need to benefit from the good things that happen in each world. This is me. You can find me on Twitter. I do have a lot of tweets, and sometimes when I'm in conferences that are not in German and I can actually understand what people are saying, I'm tweeting constantly. So please feel free to tweet. And I founded Remote Forever Summit basically to bring these two worlds together, to bring the world of Agile and distributed work together so that people can learn from each other, because there are so many good practices in each of those two worlds, but they're not necessarily connected. I work as an Agile coach most of the time, and I usually work with clients that have either of the two. So they're either at the beginning of their journey to Agile and they're already distributed, or it's the opposite. So that's me. And here's a question for all of you. So I actually want you to shout out some words when I ask you this question. Where do you guys go to get work done when you really want to be productive? Home? To your team? Where is your team? In the office. Anybody else? Say again? Coffee? Like a cafe? So this question was asked from 10,000 people in a survey. The office, during the time everybody's there, is where I'm the most productive, said no one. Not even a single person said that. A lot of people said the office before everyone comes in, or the office after everybody goes home. But no one said the office where everybody's there during the workday. This is kind of crazy, isn't it? But let's look at some data. So there are some research done on these 10,000 people, and of course a lot more. And I have actually put links to all the articles that I'm referencing here for those of you who are getting the PDF afterwards, so you can click and read them yourself. So some of the data, American Express allowed their employees to work remotely. Within a year, they saved between $10 to $15 million. And they keep allowing their employees to work remotely because of that level of cost saving that they had. 77%, which is almost 2/3 of the people. By the way, these people are all American, just so you know. They're not in Europe. They reported that they had better productivity and efficiency. 30% accomplished more in less time. And for those of you who are still on the edge of your seat and think, but what about connection and what about camaraderie? I really feel like I'm friends with my colleagues. Well, here's the data. 42% of the people actually reported that they feel just as connected with their remote colleagues. And 10% felt they are even more connected. So, these are all the references that you can find. And I actually like this sentence that Christophe Nall says. He says, as you can see, if people running into each other in the hallway is the only way problem gets solved at your company, you have bigger problems than whether or not someone works remotely. So think about that. There are lots and lots of managers who love this coffee break time. They think that's where creativity happens in the company, and therefore we need to have our offices. But the data is saying something different. That's my team. Well, part of my team anyway. As an employer, I'm actually saving massive on costs because we don't have an office. We don't pay rent for an office space. We have increased productivity and efficiency because people can work from anywhere they want. I have actually blurred the faces because these people did not want to be on the slide, so you can only see my own face. This team is in Sweden, that's where I live. It's in the UK, Netherlands, Germany, and Australia. And we even have people in Paris and Spain and the US, which is kind of crazy when you think about it. Someone loves to work from their tiny little house in Germany, and that's where she works from. She does not like to go to the office. Another guy actually has an office in a co-working space in the UK, and that's where he works from. But this is allowing people to be wherever they are most productive as we collaborate together in building a product. In this team right now, we're actually building the next Remote Forever Summit, which is an online conference that attracted 2,000 people last year. And if you think about, we're going to get more users, more customers this year, the technology really needs a lot of work. We can't afford to not be up during the week that we're launching, right? So it's a lot of work that needs to be done before everything goes online. So these people kind of correlate with the data that we have here. 45% of remote workers are getting more sleep. They have better health. They actually have the time to go to the gym. They spend more time with their family and their kids and their friends. Some people love traveling, so they get to travel more. Someone maybe has this passion for skiing in the winter, and they don't have to wait for the weekend to be there with all the other office workers. They can actually live there for a while and work from a small cottage. So, benefits for employees are pretty obvious. Lots and lots of people are choosing to work remotely. And as you can see, people of my generation, the millennials, and the ones that came after us, we are digital natives. We're very comfortable working with technology. So working remotely is not really that different from chatting with your friends or talking to your parents who live somewhere else. We're all very used to using these things. And, hold on, in a survey, this survey was done by Glassdoor. Do you know Glassdoor? They found out that number one factor for millennials to choose an employer is freedom to choose their workplace. This is crazy. Freedom to work from wherever they want is the number one factor. You have seen this scene, right? Kids sitting next to each other and sending text messages to each other. You've seen it, right? Truth is, it's not only children. Even the generation that came before us is starting to get used to using technology. If we use it in our daily life, why not use it in our work? Why is it so hard to use it in our work? Do you know Jürgen Appelo, the creator of Management 3.0? I love this sentence from him. It keeps repeating in my head overnight. Work is not a place we go to, it's what we do. Think about it for a moment. It can fundamentally change the way you think about work as a whole thing. When you want to work with someone, you don't have to go to a physical place to get that done. You would challenge your own thinking and think slightly differently. So, the first generation of digital natives, they are already in their 30s. Think about that. They're managers, they're leaders, they're shaping the future of work. And we are the pioneers of Agile, which also gives us an edge to introduce remote work to the world of Agile and to bring Agile to the world of remote work, because they both are fantastic phenomena and they can actually live happily ever after. These are two books also recommended for reading if you want. As an employer, restricting your search for a good candidate to one city, which is what most companies do, does not really make sense, does it? You won't get the best talent. And the opposite is true too. If you're a candidate and you want to look for a job, restricting your search to one company, to the companies in one city, that's also not the best approach. Lots of people would want to work for WordPress, for GitHub, for all these amazing companies that have a distributed setup, but they don't necessarily exist in their tiny little town in Germany. You should have the chance to work for those with and for those companies if you want to. And we have the technology to do that. We all need to create the right processes and the right mindsets to actually benefit from that. So, with that intro, let's look at the most common challenges that distributed companies face. I have categorized these based on the Agile Manifesto, trying to make sense of it, trying to understand where we go wrong when we do things in a distributed team. So the first one, individuals and interactions over processes and tools. This is going to be fun. So people talk about time zone differences. They talk about bad internet connection. No video, only audio, especially those who work with India. They say that a lot. Too many tools. We have too many tools. We have SharePoint, we have Confluence, we have HipChat, we have Slack, we have all these different tools. And I never know whether I should be waiting for my boss to show up in Google Hangout or Skype or Zoom or some other homebrewed video conferencing tool. We have too many tools. Lack of information transparency because we have too many tools. And of course, bad processes, because we never really put the work to create good processes. We just took the tool and used it as it was designed with all the functionality. Do you guys use Jira? You have probably seen very, very bad implementations of Jira. I am one of the lucky ones out there who has actually seen a good implementation of it too. So talk to me about it afterwards. We have too many useless meetings about those processes and tools. We are wasting time because we insist on using those tools and processes. And obviously, we're not changing or improving our tools and processes. But the bottom line is, it's not us. It's the guys who sit in the other office. It's the guys who sit far away, especially if they're outsourced to a lower cost country. The truth is, all these excuses, all these challenges that people express, it comes down to what is actually up there. That is, we assume that we need to collaborate and communicate in real time, which is not true. We don't necessarily need that. But I'll tell you what, we're actually valuing processes and tools over individuals and processes here, right? So, how do we overcome this challenge? Well, to begin, stop thinking that you need to replicate what works in colocation when you are actually distributed. Think about it. Real-time collaboration happens when you tap someone on the shoulder and say, hey dude, I need your help. Can you just come with me? You don't care that they're in the flow and they're actually being creative and being productive in their code creation. You just take them over to address your challenge. That doesn't need to happen when you're distributed. You shouldn't necessarily have a chance to just interrupt someone's flow and do that. And you don't need to. You must think and behave differently. You can't adopt the same behaviors when you're distributed. Real-time communication is quite overrated and it's often unnecessary. I know it's a bit bold to say that, but I'm pretty sure that the people, especially the digital natives in this room, agree with me. This is a fantastic tool. I've used it many times. It's called Surcoco. I've actually put all the names of the tools out there so you don't have to ask, oh, what was that tool again? You can just Google it and find it. People are having coffee in this tiny little room here. And if you see, there is actually somebody sitting here working in the feedback link. Probably they're just doing some brainstorming. And behind this, there is someone else here as well. So this tool works in a way that you can actually teleport yourself to any room. You just click on a room and your avatar is moved there. You can drag someone else there. You can actually knock at the door of a room and ask permission to enter. and only people who are in the same room can see each other's videos. It's a replica of an actual office, right? But be careful. If you use a tool like that, you're opening up for all the disturbances of the open office, which is important when you want to use tools that allow you to create the same processes and tools, to be careful. So just be careful when you use those and try to remember what I said before, that is, think differently about replicating everything that you do in an office. You remember this, right? So, but really, how do we do this? I mean, this is all fluff, right? I need some concrete actions. I am all about concrete actions. I don't like fluff. So I hope that I can give you that. Simplify. What does simplification mean? For one, use one tool for communication. I'm going to tell you more about that very shortly. Address cultural differences. And I'm not only talking about country culture differences, although that's important too. If you work with people in India and you have no idea about their culture, it's important to talk about that culture. If you're German and you work with people in Sweden, where I live, you still need to talk about those cultural differences. But I want you to also consider the cultural differences in how people work. For example, there is a guy on my team who loves having responsibility over a general area of things. With the example of the conference, that's finding sponsors. He can brainstorm, he can reach out to them, he can sign them, he can just do everything. All he needs to know is what he's responsible for. And every once in a while we have updates and we chat and we talk. So I am aware of what he's working on. On the other hand, there is a girl who does not work that way at all. She wants very detailed instructions of what she's responsible for and what she needs to do and what are the steps for that. So as a leader, I actually need to adapt my communication style to those two personalities. And I need to identify those in my team. And the same is true for peers. If you work with a colleague in a distributed setup, you need to understand what is their work culture. And if you have offices, that's a whole different level of the story, right? So you have the country culture and you also have the office culture that impacts how you work. Create asynchronously. I talked about it briefly before. You don't need to be real-time in collaboration when you're creating something. You can create a design document, the draft, send it to the team, get feedback, create it in a wiki so people can actually edit it. And create it together, but not necessarily at the same time. It is possible if you allow yourself to think slightly outside the box. It's possible for pretty much everything. And create clear, explicit agreements. I'm gonna need some water. And I actually made explicit a different color because it's super important. Conflicts happen when we don't have explicit agreements, when things are implicit. What does that mean? We were working on the website of the conference. About 3 weeks ago, we talked about our pricing. We talked about a lot of different challenges that has to do with pricing and technical challenges. And we came up with solutions to fix that. Someone asked, when are we ready to start promotion? And I said, this Saturday. And by this Saturday, what I meant was the Saturday that is marked on the schedule as the launch week. He thought I just said Saturday. So he started promoting the summit, and we actually made money, which is not bad, but it was unexpected. And the automation behind it was not ready. So people just paid into the air, sort of, into our account, but they never received anything after that. So they were wondering what happened. So I had to manually email people who had purchased the ticket and tell them that this was a mistake and they bought too early and reimbursed part of their money so they would still be happy customers. But when agreements are not explicit and are not super explicit in a remote setup, conflicts can happen, misunderstandings can happen. However, the tolerance that you have as a leader or as a company for failure is also super important. I could tell the guy who started promoting that I don't want to work with him anymore or that he's fired. But he's not fired. I mean, yeah, okay, in this case, he made us money, so that was not a terrible mistake. But the opposite can happen too. Agile principle number 10 talks about simplicity. What it says is a definition of simplicity. Do you guys remember this? Read it again. Simplicity is maximizing the amount of work not done. We talk a lot about the idea of applying simplicity to a product backlog. You say, hey, if you want to be a good product owner, you have to decide what you don't want your team to develop, what you say no to when you're talking to the different stakeholders and when you're managing expectations. You need to say no to things. You need to have this bucket and put things in that bucket. When you're thinking about processes in a distributed setup, it's the same thing. You need to create simplicity. So instead of using a million different video conferencing tools, stick to one. And always use that one. Yes, choose the best one. Invest in something. Maybe it's a bit more expensive. But invest in it and use just one. And here's one of my favorite things. Can you solve that problem that you're trying to solve without a meeting? If your answer is yes, don't say yes, but solve the goddamn problem without a meeting. This is Basecamp 3. It's a little different from the previous versions, hence the version on the slide. This is what we use in my team. It has a calendar, it has chat, instant messaging, where we have made an explicit agreement that the response time that we expect of each other is 24 hours. So if you need a quicker response or if something can wait, you use a different part of the tool for that. We have message board, which is basically where we announce stuff to the team or to each other. We have to-do lists, which is our backlog and visualization and everything in one place. But everything is in one tool. It does not offer video conferencing. Big fail, right? For those of you who are really keen on meeting people face-to-face, which is a great thing to do, especially if you work in bigger companies, here's another tool that can do pretty much everything. This is a real-time board. It can help you visualize. It has a lot of different templates. The one that you see here is a user story map, for those of you who are familiar with it. And it has chat, and very recently they also launched video conferencing feature. So they have a lot of different things. The only thing that they don't have is tracking the history of change. I hope that they also add that, so it's also possible if someone deleted the whole thing to be able to revert back to an earlier version or have some sort of backup. But they are on the cloud, and they have a great, great customer service, so they probably can help you. But hey, limit the number of tools that you use. That's really the bottom line of the message here. The next challenge, working software over comprehensive documentation. Meetings, meetings, and more meetings, instead of having a working, valuable software. You know where I'm going, right? You probably do, so I go fast. First, we meet to create the product vision, backlog, and the roadmap. Then we meet to make changes to that vision and roadmap and backlog. Then we meet to reprioritize the things that we already created and changed. Then we update the status of the work because now we have a decision, we have a backlog. Then we meet to update each other about the updated status. Then we chat and we comment to make sure that everybody knows that we changed the status of the work. You know the work was done, therefore the status changed. Then somehow, despite all these meetings and synchronization and making sure that synchronization happens, our architecture keeps getting worse. And we keep introducing bugs to the system. What the hell is going on? It could be because we don't have enough time to write test code. Maybe we need to invest time and work on our CI and CD pipeline. Yeah, let's do that. But you know, sometimes we have to have those code freezes and those release freezes to be able to do some exploratory testing to make sure that our test is actually covering the code, or you know, we have code coverage with our test. But what's that you were saying? Penetration testing? What's that? Oh yeah, security stuff. Now I know what you're talking about, but no, I have no idea who takes care of security in our organization. But we have very, very valuable retrospectives. You know that, right? We always have action points out of our retrospectives. Then you ask, what are those action points? Action points, they are usually meeting about how we run our meetings, like our sprint plannings or other meetings. This is crazy, right? We have way too many meetings and they are happening distributed. This is a problem. We think distribution is the problem, but the problem is that we have way too many meetings and we're not solving any problem with those meetings. So, what happens is that we have non-working software and we have almost no documentation because our documentation is a chaos. Nobody knows what is the one true status of the backlog. Nobody knows which information to trust. How the hell do we overcome this challenge? Well, I repeat myself. Stop thinking the same way you think when you are co-located. You need to think differently. For distributed software development to work well, we need to have great infrastructure. We need to have a working continuous integration or even continuous delivery pipeline. We need to have someone in charge of security. We can't leave security in the air. We need to talk about architecture. We need to talk about all the APIs that need to be maintained. You can't just say, you develop that feature, and by you, I mean, different teams, and now we're good. Over time, you're gonna create massive amounts of technical debt, and you won't even know where to begin to fix it. You need to invest in your technology infrastructure. It's super important, and a lot of people forget that. They talk about all these fancy tools, and they totally forget why they're there. We're there to create software. So, this is another one of those. You can actually go back to your company and be bold and brave. Did I say bald? I meant bold and brave, and give this a try. I've tried this several times, and it's scary as hell, but it does magic. So go to a team, and I say, from today on, no meeting is mandatory. Only come to the meeting if you get or add value. And at any point you feel that you're not getting or adding value, leave the meeting. No explanation needed. This usually scares off top management and middle management. Well, anyone with a leadership responsibility anyway. But if they do get on board, they start to see magic happen. Slowly, people dare to leave meetings. That's usually the first step. Someone just stands up and says, the rule, I'm just going, not getting value. And after this happens enough times, people start not showing up to some meetings. And this is a great symptom that the meeting has no value for that person who is invited. So there are several things we can do. As a person who has called for the meeting, one thing you can do is to think about, why the hell did I call that specific person? And invite the people that need to be in the meeting. The second one is something I already talked about. That is, if you actually can solve the problem without the meeting, solve the goddamn problem without a meeting. I also talked about enough documentation. Documentation is not only for our peers and for other developers, it's also for users. These are 3 apps that I actually use almost every day on my phone for communication with different people, and well, the middle one is for meditation. I used it right before this presentation. I use it quite often. I am very happy with the updates that I get, and I am one of those nerds who actually reads the release notes of applications before I press update. I like that I get only a few lines that tells me what the hell was fixed. I don't need pages of technical description of what they changed. I don't care. I only care that they are doing this update, or if there was an annoying bug that they have taken care of. So when you're creating documentation, think about what is enough documentation from a user. What is enough documentation from my peers? When we're coding, we often create documentation that is in the form of comments in the code. Sometimes you have to have external documents describing the code. Sometimes you actually don't, right? So think about what is enough in your case. Now we're getting to the third challenge. That is customer collaboration over contract negotiation. This one is a tough one. Why? Because we're not only distributed ourselves, we also need to collaborate with customers who also sit somewhere else, who also have their offices somewhere else. This adds a whole level of complexity to the problem. Are you familiar with the twin antipoles of design failure? That is basically, should I listen to the customer and do exactly what they are saying, which brings us to the very famous Ford quote. You all probably know that. And assuming that you know what is best and ignoring what the user says. Where the hell do we go? We need to create a balance between the two. And it is pretty difficult. How do we collaborate with our customers to create this? You have seen this, right? Probably you have seen a lot of those machines at the airport, at public bathrooms, and a lot of other places. What is happening here is that the company is collecting feedback from the customer, which is great. You do remember all this talk about we need real-time collaboration stuff, right? What the hell is happening here? We are only communicating with our user, with our customer, asynchronously. It's not real time. It's not bad, it's not a critic. It is good that we're collecting data and we're actually getting feedback. But what are we doing with the feedback? How are we using that feedback? That's the part that gets lost in a lot of companies, and especially in distributed companies. What do we do with that feedback? How do we benefit from it? What does it do to our backlog? What does it do to our decisions? Collaboration is not a goal. It's a process. Think about that. We want to collaborate with our customer. But collaboration is not a goal. It's a process. How do we do that? And why do we do that? What is the goal that we're trying to accomplish through this process? Is it to negate negotiating contracts so we don't have to sign SLAs and limit ourselves to a specific scope to deliver something? Not necessarily, but maybe, partially. Organizations don't collaborate. People inside those organizations collaborate. That means you guys. That means you, with all your personality, with all your relationships, politically and non-politically, inside and outside of the organization, even your hierarchy, or the rank that you have in the hierarchy. It all matters, because you are a person. And as a person, you need to collaborate with the customer. You remember the first line of the Agile manifesto, right? The first value of the manifesto. Individuals and interactions. Individuals come with a huge load of baggage. You can't say, hey, our company is collaborating with the customer company through this survey. It doesn't work that way. You need humanity in there. And when you're distributed, it's a hell lot more difficult. So we want to work together synchronously or asynchronously, and we want to achieve a specific result. That is partially reprioritization of what we're building, or maybe going a little further and challenging what we're building from the ground up. And obviously, all parties need a voice. That goes without telling. But now let's get practical again. This is all nice and dandy to hear, but how the hell do we do this? How the hell do we collaborate with our customers? So one more time, I'm going to give you a set of principles. How many of you are familiar with modern Agile? Some people, that's good. So Joshua Karyovsky, who I had the pleasure of talking to actually last week, has created modern Agile. The first principle talks about making people awesome. He has very good ways to describe what it means. So modern Agile is not there to challenge the Agile manifesto or challenge the Agile practices. It's to modernize it. And Joshua puts it really, really nicely when he says, if somebody comes to you and they have never used a mobile phone, would you give them one of those huge mobile phones that's like the size of a brick and tell them, here, start with this one and build your way to an iPhone or a modern smartphone? We don't do that. So why do we ask people, developers who have not used Agile, to use Scrum or XP practices that were built in the 80s and the 90s? This is a bit backwards. So Joshua is trying to challenge that practice through introducing new principles. The top one, make people awesome. When you're working with customers, what does it mean? In an example, we have a camera over here. When you want to buy a camera, you don't necessarily look for the greatest gear, the best functionality, the most amazing features you can find on the camera. You look for what works for you, for your needs. Are you going to shoot portraits? Are you going to shoot the wildlife? You know, what is the weight? What is the look? As a camera designer and manufacturer, you need to think about not making the best product, but making the best photographer. Does that make sense? So you don't want to build the best camera. You want to build the best photographer. Try to bring that to the product that you create. I'll give you some examples. If you're a product owner, for example, one of the products of your job is the backlog. Who uses that? Developers. Think about the developers and make them awesome. Create great stories for them. Make them feel awesome by using that backlog. If you're a manager and you make a lot of decisions, who benefits from those decisions? Your employees. Make them awesome. So that's one way to think through these principles. That's the German version for those of you who probably want it. It exists in a lot of different languages. This set of principles was actually influenced by this book. It's a really great book. If you have the time, read it, then it's a quick read. It's called Badass, Making Users Awesome. And it literally talks about how to collect feedback and how to think from the perspective of the user instead of thinking as an engineer and trying to create the best product in the world. Customer journey is something that we create. A lot of you have done that. This book is another great one. It talks about a four-step process called the ask method. The ask method consists of deep diving, feeling the emotions of the customer. It happens through various ways, collecting data, questioning them, sending surveys, and actually sitting with them and observing how they interact with the product. And it goes to micro-segmentations. And the third step, which is kind of fun, is the do you hate me step. That is, if the person did not interact with the feature or if they actually did not buy your product, why did that happen? You ask them, you literally ask the person. The person leaves the page, a pop-up shows up and says, hey, before you go, can you tell me why you're leaving? And it's pretty annoying how people are implementing it. But if you think about it, there are actually smart ways to implement the ask method. And the last one is pivotal, which is based on the answers that you get from your customers. Pivot your path. Make changes to your product development and actually make something happen with the data that you're collecting on that feedback. Design sprints. If you have tried them, there is actually, I think, one of the best companies that consults for design sprints is already in Germany. Read the books. There's loads of material of how to do design sprints, and it's perfect when you're starting to think about a new product or when you're starting to think about a new feature in your product. So it's not necessarily for just, MVPs of whole new products and building new technology companies. It can be used for a lot of different cases. And you actually literally collaborate with the customer on site. And when you're distributed, that on site changes to being on camera and working asynchronously from time to time. Customer feedback over collaboration. As a last example, that's from the last year's conference. We actually celebrated with the customers. Those are the attendees on the call. And we celebrated. I had champagne, and other people had coffee and water and a lot of other things. Which brings us to the next one. Responding to change over following a plan, which is the most important one of the Agile values, in my opinion anyway. Because I think Agile literally sort of means responding to change over following a plan. In a lot of different companies, whether they're distributed or not, we have sort of this mentality of responding to change. But do we really respond to change? Andy Singleton says technology is not making distributed teams more like co-located teams. It's doing the exact opposite. It's making everybody else more like distributed teams, just like the kids that you saw. They sit together and they text each other, which is what happens naturally in a distributed team. What does that have to do with responding to change? It has everything to do with what I have said several times already. That is, you need to think differently. Our teams and organizations are becoming distributed. How are we going to respond to that change? Of course, it's human nature not to take any action when you don't need to, but we need to do something. Pair programming remotely. Is it good? Is it bad? It works for co-location. Let's give it a try and see if it works or not. In this case, it did. Mob programming. Yeah, kind of fun. Demo review, however. People sitting in several different conference rooms, one person controlling the mouse, and those people sitting in India or China, like they have a leader and only the leader talks to the microphone. Nobody hears the rest of the people. And sometimes it's a chaos. Demo usually is a chaos when you do it distributed. So here's an alternative. Have everyone be distributed. That is, have them sit at their own desk and call into the demo. It's a great experience. You can totally take it back to your company and give it a try. Retrospective, as a last example. This is Retrium, another tool that allows you to gather data during the sprint. You don't have to wait until the event retrospectives to gather data. It is frustrating. It's the most frustrating part of retrospective when you're distributed. The rest is magic. You discuss, you cluster things, you talk about them, you make decisions. But the first part is the part that annoys the most people. Do that asynchronously. It's totally possible. You can also use real-time board that I described before. You can even use email for that matter. And one of the last things is please do not forget to have fun. It is possible to have fun when you're distributed. You remember the people in Surcoco having coffee, right? Don't forget the socializing part and having fun part. And one of the last ones is creating psychological safety. If you are a leader, you need to understand what psychological safety means, and you need to understand how to create it for yourself and for your employees. And if you're not a leader, it's equally as important to understand what not to say, what not to do, and what to do to create a psychological safe environment, whether it's an office or a remote environment. I'm not going to go through the details. If you want to learn, this is just an ad. Join the conference. It's free to sign up, and you can actually watch everything for free. You can buy a ticket if you want to access the videos afterwards. It has been me, Molood, Alavijeh, and this was a talk.